Okay, at this point, we'll go ahead and call the Wood County Executive Committee meeting to order, and I'll open up the public budget hearing. I would ask that our Finance Director, Mike Martin, go through that proposed budget for us. Mike?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As far as the 2015 budget, you're going to see some fairly dramatic changes in some totals. And as we go through this, you'll see that a lot of it has to do with the whole process as far as how we finance highway construction and how much we do, and the borrowing related to it. So I'd like to just kind of go through the slides now, and again, I think we can, if you have questions as they come up, I think feel free to ask them as we're going through the slides. And in a commercial enterprise, a non-government enterprise, a lot of ways you might approach your balancing your operations is, okay, how much does it cost me to create what I'm going to sell, and then I will try to price it accordingly. Governments are different. We're very limited as far as the resources we have to run our operation. So our budget a lot of times starts with our available revenues. And in 2014, our total revenue sources were a little less than $93 million. But a great deal of that was in fund balance applied, $4,165,000. As we take a look now at 2015's revenue sources, you'll see that the total revenue sources have jumped from about 93 million to about a little over 100 million. And so about an $8 million increase in our total sources of revenue. And the changes that occurred in that, again, are in that fund balance applied area. But that's only going up by 1.4 million. But the breakdown of that, as we see later, is fairly dramatic. Other changes as far as sources of revenue are intergovernmental, which is our state aid mostly, jumped by a little less than $3 million. Our tax levy, our total tax levy, went up by about $700,000. And our sales tax jumped by about $500,000.
I'm sorry, fund balance applied, didn't that go up by $2.4 million?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Thank you.
I try to be good with numbers. Sometimes I need my calculator.
Our Finance Director, ladies and gentlemen, our Finance Director.
A good catch. Yes, 2.4. And so those are the major changes as far as the sales tax, the property tax, the state aid, and then the fund balance applied, 2.4. As you go into the expenditures then, you'll see that, again, expenditures are going to equal revenues as far as the total ways we use our money. I'll go ahead and bring 15 up at the same time. The significant changes in the revenues as far as where they're paid for, what they do, occurred in health and social services, or health and human services. That went up by 3.7 million. A big portion of that is Wood County is going to be hosting, I believe, the regional FSET program starting sometime in 2015. So of this increase of 3.7, about 2.4 million of that is just concentrated in that FSET program. Highway went down by $1 million from $10.5 million to $9.5 million. That is the first indication of the big change we made as far as how we finance our road construction. The road construction that was in there in 2014 was about $1.5 million, maybe a little bit greater than $1.5 million. That's been moved to the capital outlay area and is financed with debt proceeds. But we did have an increase in highway offsetting that in our county aid for bridges. That went up by about, I think, $150,000. Debt service is going up by about $800,000, and that's all related to the new debt issue that we took out at the end of 2014 to finance the road construction. Transfers out went up, but that's all directly related to the sales tax that was on the earlier slide. And then finally, the capital outlay went up by $3.7 million. And there's a bunch of increases and decreases, but the main increase in there is for the highway construction. That went up by it's about $5 million as far as highway construction. The other way to look at expenditures is as far as how do we incur those expenditures, not what they're used for, as far as general government, health and human services, public safety, but in what way do we deliver those? And again, it's because most governments are service-oriented, the pie chart is always going to be dominated by wages and fringes. That makes up, in 2015, the percentage went down a little bit. The dollars went up, but the percentage went down because our overall budget increased more than wages and fringes did. But contractual services is a big increase there, and again, that's mostly in that regional FSET program. Where those are included. Our tax rate is affected by the changes in our equalized value. For 2015, our tax rate for operations is staying exactly the same. And we're limited as far as that part of our tax rate by net new construction. Our net new construction went up by 1.1%, but our equalized value only went up by 0.63% for 2015. We kept our tax rate the same for operations, and so it only went up by, the dollars went up by 0.63%. We could have gone up by the 1.1. So as far as our levy limitations, as far as what the Department of Revenue limits us to, we're under that limitation by a little over $100,000. Here's a history of our tax rates. You can almost know what happened in Wood County by changes in our tax rate. The first big change occurred between 2003 and 2004. Our tax rate went from $5.71 down to $4.83. And that was when we implemented the 0.5% sales tax. And the county ordinance that we adopted at that time said that a minimum of 50% of the sales tax had to go towards property tax relief. And so that was a big drop in our tax rate. In 2006, it went up by about 12 cents. That's when Wood County took on shared dispatch. And so those costs that were incurred in the city of Marshfield and the city of Rapids got transferred to Wood County. And so that allowed our levy limitation, because we took on that additional cost, to go up. You'll see from 2009 through 2014, our tax rate was essentially the same, unchanged at $469, $470 for all those years. For 2015, the proposed budget has an increase of about 11 cents in the tax rate for communities that have their own library. And all of that, of course, is related to the debt service. As I mentioned earlier, our tax rate for operations is staying exactly the same at about $4.60. But our debt service portion is going from 10 cents to 21 cents. And that, again, is related to the new debt for highway construction. Here's just a graphical presentation of our tax rates, and you can see the big drops that occurred as far as when the sales tax was implemented, a little bump up when we took on shared dispatch, and then essentially flat for all those years, and a little bit of a bump for the 2015 budget. This is a chart that I put together for the first time last year, and it shows when people get their tax bill, it's not just Wood County, of course, even though it's got our name, I believe, at the top, but it's got all the other taxing entities. And our share of that has dropped quite a bit. It peaked back in 2007, where City of Marshfield and City of Rapids, that we were at 20 or 19 or 21.5% of the tax bill. Now it's dropped down to 18.4 and 16.4. So it doesn't mean that, that we've got a good budget and they got a bad budget. It's just that our share of the total tax bill continues to drop. That may change for the 2014 levy, for the 15 budget, because as I understand it, the tech school rate is dropping dramatically. And so our share of it would probably go up a little bit of the total tax bill, because theirs is going down. The next slide, this slide here, as far as the 2014 budget and 2015 budget, highlights that what the highway department and the executive committee and the finance department wanted to do as far as the construction costs for highway and how they're funded and the impact on our budget, that it really has succeeded in doing what we thought and hoped it would do. In 2014, when a budget gets adopted for each department, it usually will say, okay, how much levy do they need to balance their budget? What do they subsidize over and above their own program revenues to balance their expenditures? And that's more than just levy. It's all the non-program revenues. The biggest portion of it is tax levy at about $22 million, but it also has the sales tax in there. It's got the shared revenue, because those are both non-program. And also, the other big portion of it is undesignated, unreserved general fund balance that's needed to balance the budget. In 2014, we needed almost $1.8 million of our general cash reserves to balance the 2014 budget. And both myself and the executive committee knew that that was unsustainable. That number only gets created by positive budgeted variances, meaning that departments turn back money that they didn't need from the previous year. That's probably the only reason that number is there. Plus, we want to have a little bit, cash reserves to pay bills as we're waiting for our revenues to come in. What happened as far as between 14 and 15, you'll see that for 15, for our general cash reserves, that we don't need any of those cash reserves. Matter of fact, the cash reserves are projected to go up very slightly, about $24,000. The biggest portion of that fund balance applied comes down in designated funds applied. And you'll see that went up dramatically, but the reason that that is so much larger is that we closed the debt on our highway in October. So all that money got deposited into designated cash reserves. And that money is going to be spent then in our 2015 budget to construct highways. So that's why that number is so large, is that nearly $5 million of that is the debt money that's waiting for the highway construction period to start in 2015. That $32 million on the previous slide as far as general cash reserves, it gets shared by all departments that can't cover all of their expenditures with their own revenues. And between 2014, and here's 2014, how each department shared in that $32 million. And over the years, it stays fairly the same. You'll see that Human Services and Sheriff are the largest ones, but they're different in the fact that Human Services has got so much more program revenues than Sheriff. Almost all of Sheriff's money needs to be funded with tax levy. But as we overlay 2015 on the top of this, there are a couple of changes that occurred. Debt service went from 1.4% of our levy to 3.1%. And again, that's because the debt service on our new highway borrowing is in 2015. Highway went down quite a bit. It went from 8.7 to 4.2. And that's because we moved those construction costs out of highway, and now we have it in the capital project funds funded with debt service, or debt proceeds. Those are the two significant changes as far as debt service and highway. And again, that was significant because we lowered highway's levy by about the $1.5 million. And we're able to use that instead of the undesignated cash reserves. Here's our targeted and budgeted cash reserves. The targeted number, we always seek to have 15% of our base number, which is most of our annual budget, to be sitting in cash reserves. And as you may have heard me say in previous years, we need that working capital because so much of our money, our revenue sources come in well after the money is spent. Our shared revenue, that $3 million that we get in non-program revenue, we only get like 15% of that in the first half of the year, and it isn't until the middle of November that we get the bulk of our shared revenue. And then many of our state aid programs, we might get the money 2-3 months after the money's already been spent, because we have to file a claim, and then the state certainly looks on their own cash flow. Here's a graph percentage as far as how well we've achieved that 15%. So as we look at that line, as far as 15%, that's our goal as far as to hit that line. And we've tested the appropriateness of that 15% a few times. Here we were pretty close to it, but in 2011 we dropped quite a bit below in order to just balance that particular year's budget. And when we did that, testing of that number below the 15% showed that 15% was appropriate. We came close to having to do short-term borrowing towards the end of the year in 2011 in order to pay our bills, as far as whether they're highway construction or payroll. And now for the last few years, we've been above that 50%, and our cash flow is where we want it to be. Here's a graph as far as what has happened with wages and fringes over the year. Again, our wages and fringes are the dominant portion of our budget, but they have changed fairly dramatically, and usually has to do with whether it's Act 10 that cut the retirement rate that the county has to pay. That dropped our fringes dramatically in that year, and also due as far as when we regionalize services and outsource them, whether it's to ADRC or CCCW, and reduce our own FTEs, our own wages will go down dramatically. In the last couple of years, it has gone up a little bit, and that's mostly due to the implementation of the wage plan. We always track as far as what's happening to total county positions, total FTEs, full-time equivalents. And in 2015 budget, we've got a few decreases in FTEs, but we've got a few increases. The increases, just to highlight them, Clerk Court has got a new position for scanning. Human Resources has a new position for countywide recruiting. And then Human Services has an increase of 3 FTEs, and that's 4 positions for the regional FSET, and then they also had an overall decrease in their other positions. And then how those FTEs are broken down as far as by what they do. You can see just by our pie chart for expenditures, we are dominated by Health and Human Services. The other ones have stayed fairly stable over the years, whether it's general government, that has about 64 positions, public safety is about 103, highway 46, health and human services 360, leisure and recreation about 20, and conservation and development 11. So that's how our total countywide positions are broken down. I'll open up to questions.
Thank you. I do have a question on the recruiter position. Where would we discuss that, and is that in this spot here, or?
Absolutely.
Pardon?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, what I'd like to see is us to hold off on that recruiter position for 1 year. I don't think it's necessary right now. I would like to see us wait and look at it and study it a little bit more. Right now, with the way the economy's coming back, it's coming back slow, but it is coming back. I think we can look at the position a little bit more in the future and figure out whether we do need this or not. I cannot vote for this budget with that recruiter position in there. I would like to see that taken out. And then everything else looks well, besides the one I voted against before, the 4.85 million. But I can live with that. This position, I do not support.
And actually, the decision whether that would have to be an amendment on the floor. If you had questions about it, we could answer the questions during the public hearing, but the actual amendment to the budget on the floor would be during the county board meeting, and then we're going to want to know where you're pulling and where you're putting the money to. Because you're pulling a certain amount of money out of a certain account line.
Right.
Where are you putting it after that? I mean, that's certainly a amendment we could do on the floor of the county board.
That is on the floor of the county board.
That would be,
That's the question I had.
That would be with the resolution, yeah, not knowing exactly what you're talking, I thought it was just more information. That would be during the approved year 2015 budget. That would be the second resolution, because we always do levy first and then the budget, because we're from towns. And towns do levy first and then budget.
Okay, so I may need a little help with that. Like I said, I'm still learning.
Yeah, is there any more information about that recruiter position you need from HR? I mean,
No.
she deluged you with numbers and
Yes,
facts
you did,
stuff.
and I do appreciate that. I know, and I see her position on that. And I have no problem with her position. I just do not personally believe that we need that recruiter position right now. I'm not,
Okay.
like I said.
Okay. Supervisor Winch.
Well, along those same lines, if you look at page 53 of our packet, under human resources, we have labor relations at 28,200. I would have thought that once negotiations went away, we wouldn't need that 28,200. To my knowledge, in the past, there was a lot of time spent negotiating contracts, grievances, etc. But
And we do have a contract coming up this year.
Sure.
Yep, the Sheriff's Department will be coming up this year.
yeah, but that's minor compared to what we were doing in the past.
Very true, but the labor relations isn't necessarily all just labor, I mean, just a union contract. Connie could probably address that a little bit better. Connie, if you want to say what that all entails, you can do it better than I can.
Just touch
So that fund is also for other labor disputes, grievances, EEOC complaints, any legal fees that we incur as a result of defending the county's position on employment-related actions.
And I think we have 2 EEOC outstanding.
Yes, 2 that are active at this time.
Any other questions or comments? Supervisor Mahan.
Thank you. I have a question for Mike, I guess both of you. But if I understood this right, the bonded money is being set aside in cash reserves temporarily.
Designated cash
And
reserves.
statutorily, we are required to spend that money only on highways. How do we go about ensuring that that money is spent specifically on highway projects?
Doug Pazno's accountant and I have generated a chart of accounts that will be just completely set aside for the debt proceeds that are awaiting expenditure and then the expenditures as they incur. So it's going to be in a capital projects fund where the debt money comes in and then gets spent down. So as the year goes on, if that needs to be audited as far as the appropriateness of those, we can drill down in any one of those postings, those expense accounts, and then get support as far as that indeed it was spent for the purpose that the debt was taken out. And then if the money is more than what we need, then any remaining money out of that 4.85 million will go into the debt service fund to pay down principal and interest without being levied.
Supervisor Wagner.
Can you assure me that, as I understand it, when Health and Human Services takes over the FSET program, the regional consortium, and I think it's 9 counties are going to take over, There's an increase in FTEs, there's also about a $3 million increase in the budget. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that most of that offset will be from revenues. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there any levy, is there any additional levy required?
Not for that regionalization, no.
Thank you very
All of it
much.
will be offset by
Yep.
revenue.
Thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Supervisor Curry?
Thank you. To Mike Martin, you talked, I understand the part about the levy going down on the highway department because of the borrowing. What happens when the borrowing's done? What happens to that levy? Does it go back reinstated?
It would have to be. And that's where the main reason we did that, on that one slide that showed we used 1.8 million of cash reserves, that was almost exactly what they needed for construction costs. And so that was our main reason for changing that financing, because we could not sustain using cash reserves in order to keep our highway infrastructure up. I mean, that was, that was our focus as far as ability to balance our budget. So yes, if we don't do the borrowing in future years, we will be back in that unbalanced situation as far as not having enough revenue sources other than cash reserves to balance our expenditures, unless we have dramatic reductions in our expenditures.
Thank you.
Supervisor Clendenning?
In that consortium that was just mentioned about would the payroll be with Wood County, as in RC, ADRC, it's with Marathon County? So your answer is what?
We would be the fiscal agent for that, so that would be us, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. On page 57, we got an item in there under expenditures, payment in lieu of taxes at $77,345. Can you tell me what that's for?
Those expenditures are for the non-taxable items in both, I think it's in the city of Marshfield and city of Rapids, like, Port Edwards, that the Edgewater Nursing Home, Norwood Health Center, those don't pay taxes, those entities. But because they're a health center, there's two elements within the statutes that encourage us to pay a payment in lieu of tax to those entities that have those types of health centers and airports. We make a payment in lieu of tax. Now that number is, each year we would get an estimated assessed value of Edgewater and Norwood and airports, so we can compute what the payment in lieu of tax would be. Since the levy freeze, we've frozen that number. It stayed at the 77,000 for ever since the levy freeze was implemented. That answer your question?
Yeah, that explains it, but there's also another one, I don't know the exact page in here, for 13,000 something payment in lieu of taxes. I would assume that's forestry or something?
Yes, yes. I'm not that familiar with that number either, but it has to do
It's
with...
constant also, as for years.
Correct.
That one can fluctuate based upon, I think, it's the forestry lands and towns.
Yeah, I think that payment in lieu of taxes, because the payment in lieu of taxes for the forestry end of it is paid for by the state of Wisconsin. The county pays the payment in lieu of taxes because we're a pass-through for the Wood County Wildlife Area. I think that's where a big part of that comes from, where the state gives us a chunk of money, then we have to give money to the town of Remington for hosting that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or public comment on the budget? Anything? Okay. So Mike doesn't look like a yo-yo. No more questions for Mike, right? Okay. Not now.
Give us 5 minutes.
A couple of things I want to talk about a little bit. Mike talked about, the FSET is, again, like we mentioned, the 2.4 million. That is strictly state funded, so that is not a levied item for that increase in FTEs. The library rate did go up. The cost of circulation is up. Mike mentioned that, I believe it's 2 cents. And we reimburse at a 77% rating. State statute requires a 70%. Wood County is making inroads of reimbursing the libraries or the municipalities that have libraries the full amount of what it costs for the townspeople to use those services. But we've been at 77% for the last few years now. The FTEs, we talked about the increases. One increase that wasn't mentioned because it actually went through last year was in branch 1. That FTE was added to last year's budget but wasn't filled. They do anticipate filling that in 2015. One thing that this budget does not address is the long-range building needs. We did not address that. There just, by the time the report came in, there wasn't much time to do anything with that. So that'll be a topic of discussion for this board going forward into 2016. Mike mentioned also the budget actually represents the first time in probably since Mike's been here, or certainly since I've been up here, that we have an actual balanced budget that doesn't use the cash reserves to balance it, which means that this year's expenditures are funded by this year's revenues, and this is the first time that that's happened in certainly recent memory. The increase in levy, Mike mentioned that as well. It took away all my good points that I written down, so you're just going to hear it repeated. The operational levy remains the same. We did not use all of the allowed levy, state allowed levy. Mike mentioned that as well, that we're about $100,000 below that, but we did keep the operational levy the exact same. So the increase in levy is strictly the borrowing. And those reasons have been debated and voted on already. This budget certainly starts us down a different path. And Supervisor Curry mentioned it as well, that if we continue borrowing or whether we don't continue borrowing for highway construction will certainly play a significant role in future budgets. We certainly support the efforts of the WCA, the Towns Association. I'm sure the league is involved in it, of getting more financial aid, more general transportation aids from the state. Mr. Winch believes that that is forthcoming, and I'll put a little money on that bill if you want to. I'll buy you that 12-foot hose that you won't buy. Winch was in a fleet here a couple of days ago. I'm going to embarrass you, Winch. He's really worried about this tax increase because he needs a propane hose for his heater where he goes hunting up north at his cabin up north. And he refused to buy the 12-foot because he only needed 6-foot. He had to save that money because his taxes were going up on the county. So I give him heck about that and probably will for all of 2015. So whether or not that comes, we'll certainly, this next budget season with the state will certainly bear that out. We are just one part, like Mike mentioned, a part of this tax bill. Certainly I think the increase that we are seeing, the increases that the schools are seeing, I see Marshfield, the school district of Marshfield, the school district of Pittsville is using that exemption of referendum for borrowing for the efficiency needs at their buildings. Pittsville's gone down that road, Marshfield's going down that road, I believe. I don't know if anybody on the south end is doing that as well. So you'll see increases in those districts as well. But I still think they're going to be mitigated by the fact that Midstate is taking quite what I'll call a dump in their tax levy. They had a lot of state money pushed into their budgets this year. Lance, you might want to speak to that because you do go to those board meetings.
Yeah, Mid-State's tax levy is cut in half this year. You have a 58. In fact, I gave the sheet to Mr. Winch, so he's got it to read. But no, go ahead, Bill. Their levy is down 50% this year.
Yeah, I want to say it's 90 cents.
I do attend their meetings as the county board chairs and the counties that are represented appoint their board. So I do attend the meetings to find out what's going on there. But just to give you a quick update, they have a tax levy that is $10,272,000 roughly less than last year's tax levy. Their mill rate was cut in half to 83 cents, meaning that a $100,000 home will be at $83.34 this year. That's a savings on that same home of over $90 from the previous year. So you have half the taxes in levy that you were paying on your technical school bill will appear on your tax bill. Now that was backfilled with other spending, that those dollars weren't just taken away from the technical schools, it was backfilled by other tax revenue in the state, but they thought it was more appropriate than using property tax levy.
So I think some of the increases you're seeing with really a lot of these municipalities, I think towns are probably going up their allowed amount. A lot of them are. Certainly the county's increase and the school district's increase will be mitigated by that fact. And you kind of remember historically the tech colleges have been far and ahead of, much farther in going ahead in their tax levy over the few years. I mean, they were at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9% increases every year for a number of years. So now that we see that mitigate, or that portion of it off, I think the increases that the other governmental entities are looking at will be mitigated somewhat. Let's see, I certainly appreciate everyone's effort in bringing the budget to this point. A lot of work goes into it, and we recognize and appreciate that, the work from our department heads, the accountants, and the oversight committees for really going through those budgets to the point where when the executive committee gets those two great big binders in front of me, you guys have done very much due diligence on bringing as lean a budget as you can, and the executive committee and the finance department certainly appreciates that. I believe the budget being presented to you today is a responsible one. It meets the needs of our residents and our taxpayers. Using debt to fund long-term expenditures, it certainly fulfills our need not only for the roads, because the 1.8 million wasn't cutting it. It certainly fulfills those needs for not only for our residents, but also for economic development, in my opinion. I especially want to thank Mike Martin, the finance director, and Marla Cummings behind him, our deputy finance director, and Bonnie Newberg, our secretary, for putting the budget together. Painstaking hours, late hours. I get emails from Mike well past the 4:30 time limit. I've even gotten emails during Packer games, as a matter of fact. I don't think he's in the office, but I've gotten emails during the Packer games as well. Certainly, I thank them wholeheartedly for all the effort that they do put in putting this budget together, and then putting it in a form that actually county board supervisors can understand. That 19-page document that Mike emailed to everybody, I mean, that really takes those binders and compresses it down and makes it easy to understand, and I appreciate all the work that goes into that. Anything else at the public hearing? At this point, Chairman Plimmel.
I was just going to add really quickly, and Trent touched on it, this budget is not put together really by the executive committee. It's put together by the committees out there. The work we do on the budget is really a coordination of putting all those together, but the work is done at the committee level. I bet we don't make 10 changes to the entire budget by the time we get it. And so that is greatly appreciated. That used to be a painstaking week to 2 week long process, and now we get it, it's all boiled down and done, and I just wanted to reiterate what he had said in that respect.
Anything else? At this point, I will close the budget hearing. The executive committee meeting is still in session. We have 2 items to act on, and that would be the levy resolution and the budget resolution. A motion to approve those to send to county board for their consideration by Rozar, seconded by Hinkle. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. A motion to adjourn would be in order by Plimmel, seconded by Rozar. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We are adjourned for a few minutes. Thanks, folks.